Hey everyone, Stephen here, and welcome to my little library of horrors. So, I often credit Stephen King's It as the book that essentially reignited my passion for reading. However, today's book that I'm reviewing, I often credit as the book that made my library what it is today, and not just filled with a bunch of Stephen King books. Um, I first discovered this book after getting a little burnt out on Stephen King's work. I had read nothing but him for about 2 years, so I kind of wanted to see what else was out there. And the very first book I Googled top horror novels of, I think, the year at that point or something, or I can't remember exactly what I Googled. But anyway, as soon as I saw the first book that popped up, I loved the cover. The title right away caught my attention. So I read the blurb on the back, and that instantly made me pick it up right away. And that book I'm talking about is none other than Nick Cutter's The Troop. Really awesome cover. I think it really sums up the a central theme of the story very well, which that being isolation. But I also really enjoyed that it's kind of this, while it's the very cliche red and black, color on horror covers, I think it did really nice. I think it sticks out pretty nicely. But yeah, let's see. I believe this was published in 2013, 2014. So this was published in 2014, and it's by Pocket Books. So, what is The Troop about? So, essentially, The Troop is Lord of the Flies meets 28 Days Later. This Boy Scout, Scout Group 52, I believe is Troop 52, and their Scoutmaster is out on their, this big trip, essentially, where the boys will learn to sort of survive on their own for a couple days in this secluded island. So what happens is, the very first night they're there, this man seems to walk on to their campsite and is emaciated and just wants to eat something, just constantly mentions talking about eating. So Scoutmaster Tim decides, who is also a doctor, decides to help the man, and shortly after, chaos ensues. They discover that the man is infected with some kind of disease that is eating him from the inside out and is causing this massive hunger to where, he's been eating excuse me, where he's been eating algae and things like that. So he discovers the infection, and then unfortunately Scoutmaster Tim becomes infected himself, and eventually the boys are now stranded on this island by themselves with no way to escape and no way to search for help. And it's just, overall, it's a really fantastic book. I love everything about it. First and foremost, the cast of characters is wonderful. As I've always said, I genuinely don't enjoy teenage characters. I find them very obnoxious and just annoying. But Cutter does this wonderful thing where, again, he takes this cliche of, your typical teenage boys in this, and every one of them sort of fills their own dynamic, where we have Kent, who is sort of the bullheaded powerhouse of the group, the one that, sort of asserts his leadership, but isn't really the leader. Almost like a Raphael of the Ninja Turtles, if you will, where he's very... Well, no, I guess I shouldn't say that. Again, I would say he's more of like an Eric Cartman from South Park, where he gives off this false bravado and I'm smarter than everyone else kind of thing. Then we have Maxwell, or Max for short. He's essentially our well-rounded character. He's sort of the one that is essentially everyone looks to as the leader when it comes down to decision-making and everything. It seems to be more grounded and well thought out when it comes to plans and things like that. We have Ephraim, who I would associate more as Raphael with the Ninja Turtles. He's very hot-headed, has a bad temper, um, is quick to violence, but is not necessarily, I think, a bad kid. Is very misunderstood, and it will stick up for his friends. Him and Max are best friends. So then we have Newt, who would be sort of the Donatello of the group. He's very intelligent. He does get picked on a lot because he's your typical pudgy nerd, mama's boy whose mother's overprotective and things like that. And then we have easily my favorite character in the whole book, and as essentially sort of our antagonist of the book, Shelley. So with Shelley, like if I were to make a list of favorite antagonists, which eventually I will, Shelley would easily make that list. I'll never forget the feelings he made me feel anytime he came on scene as the story progresses later on. So with Shelley, he's very to himself. He's quiet, he's lanky, just odd, like very odd. And it's often, said amongst the boys in the group, Shelley just is not really their friend. He's just sort of there, they're forced to hang out with him. But they also don't make fun of him because, they can't quite get a feel on Shelley. And I love that with characters, when you can't pinpoint them, so to say. And that's what makes Shelley incredible to me in this book, is that he has seemingly no motive behind his actions other than, it seems, almost either pure psychopathy or genuine morbid curiosity. He once the psychological I think he's the psychological aspect of horror within this body horror story. He often will play on the sort of the sensitivity of the other boys. So for instance, Kent is very quickly infected after Scoutmaster Tim. So what happens is Shelley will, they end up locking Kent in the cabin as they go to search for food and things like that. Shelley ends up staying behind and is sort of torturing Kent with food, which is actually just kind of like bugs and whatever else he can find. Another really awesome thing, I shouldn't say awesome thing that he does, but another just mind game he plays is he ends up aggravating Ephraim to the point where Ephraim punches him in the mouth, scraping his knuckles in the process. So Shelley now sort of just plants that little seed, like, hey, you've got an open wound now where we are. And that's sort of Ephraim's arc throughout the book, is this psychological terror that am I infected or am I not? And he has Shelley in his ear saying, oh, I can see it, Ephraim. I can see it right there. And that, and like, the things Shelley makes Ephraim go through is genuinely unspeakable, not only morally wise, but YouTube will probably take the video down. But it's just, I love Shelley. And he's always referred to as, he never seems to have he's never described in human traits. He's always described as like this insect. He's got buggy eyes and he moves like a certain way, always to bugs. And I really love that because it adds this level of sort of disconnect from Shelley to where, like, I can hate him more. But then we get this scene with him that, again, it's extremely hard to say you have sympathy for him, but in this scene, like, you kind of do. Like, it strips away all of the mystery, the sort of horror behind Shelley, and shows him bare bones, just the kid that he is. And I love that. Again, it just adds a level of complexity to his character that I really enjoy. So yeah, to me, Shelley is only one shining point out of this whole book that really brings it together. I really enjoy the pacing. Like, it does not take long at all for things to get going, and it really just keeps your attention the whole book through. It's really nice that we get some great backstory on the boys as well. It's not just always focused on what's going on in the island, but a dive into why their personalities are the way that they are. So I really enjoy that. And I also enjoyed that it's sort of like is almost written like Carrie in a way, where we get news clippings of what happened on the island. Excuse me. We get scientific reports as to like what the experiments that were going on, as to why this infection is spreading and what it is and things like that. We have like court documents about interviewing people that were involved in the experiments and things like that. And the way that that leads into the pacing is that the boys will have, so like there's one scene where like the boys are starting to wonder why their parents haven't come to look for them yet. It's been a week at this point. And, they're starting to just, feel like their parents have abandoned them and are not coming to look for them. Whereas in the very, like, either at the end of that chapter or the beginning of the next, we see that Kent's father and Maxwell's father actually stole a boat and tried to get to the island to reach the boys, but were stopped by the military police surrounding the island. So it's just another really awesome layer of psychology to the story that it just adds a lot of attachment to the characters and helps build that sense of wanting to help them, that sense of helplessness that they have, and even the sense of, as a parent, that, again, that feeling of helplessness of wanting to help your children, but you can't. So it's just it's another really good detail to the story that bumps it up into this even bigger than what it already is. The climax is wonderful. And to me, the climax is like probably a solid like 50-60 pages. Like, it's not just, okay, this is where like the big thing happens. It's like, okay, we can start to see the seeds of how the climax is going to play out. But it's just like, okay, this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens. And it's all, like I said, so well paced that it doesn't ever feel rushed. It doesn't feel crowded. It doesn't feel like filler. Like, everything has a point. Every sentence is built to build dread. And it does that wonderfully. Again, leading up to that climax, it's just this huge juggle of what is going to happen. And, but yeah. Another thing that I really enjoy, and I guess I've kind of touched on it a bit, is that it's not just body horror. It takes the psychological aspect and mixes it into body horror. But that's not to say the body horror doesn't shine at all. There is really gruesome scenes in this book that, like, I remember when I first read this one specific scene. I don't want to spoil it, but, oh man, I'll say this. Somebody ends up touching one of their own bones, and I'm just getting the chills now. Like, the way it's described and how it leads to that point, just that whole scene, it just gives me the chills. It's so good though. Like, and that's just one incredibly intense scene that involves the body. There's so much more that happens, like, seeing the infection start to take its toll on some of the characters in the book, and like what it does to them, and like how they have no control over their hunger. Uh, oh, it's just great. It's just great. Um, so there's one thing within the book that's sort of like very controversial within the story that I kind of wanted to put in my own 2 cents in. So there's this the book does have a lot of scenes of animal cruelty. So if that's not your thing, I do recommend you pass on it. However, excuse me. The scene that often comes into conversation is a scene with a turtle where two of the boys discover a turtle and they kill it to eat it, essentially. And it's a very intense, heartbreaking scene where, like, again, it's the boys essentially stabbing this turtle to death trying to get food. And it's like, a lot of people put the book down because they say it's too graphic. It feels like animal torture. You know what. And I don't feel that way. For me, scenes like that would be considered that, I would say, look at Goodnight Moon and what Harry in that instant does to a cat. He does it for enjoyment, whereas in this scene, the boys are very clearly distraught. Like, there's crying, there's like, someone even vomits, like, and even at the end of the book, it heavily weighs on a certain character that is like, I killed this thing. Can I ever truly be pure again? So, and to me, it was meant for survival. These kids haven't eaten in days. They're starving. They're scared. And it's the first real sense of meat that they've had, like I said, in a few days. So I genuinely don't think that it's gratuitous or torturous. Is it intense and graphic? Absolutely. But I think that it's not only a fantastic scene in the story, but I think an important scene of sort of the resilience of the human mind and what we're truly capable of when it comes to our own survival. So, so me personally, I think the scene is fine. It's not like I go back and read it like, oh, I love this, but I appreciate what it does for the story. But yeah, how's the ending? The ending is, God, it's a downer, man. Like, it's great, and it leaves a chill up your spine. But holy cow, you're just like, man, this is not a happy ending kind of book. But that's first until it leads to the very final sentence that just instantly gets a chill up the spine, and I love it. But yeah, so what do I rate it? Easily a 5 out of 5. This was a reread for me, but again, I haven't read this book in, gosh, probably 11 or 12 years. But it's brutal. It's excellently paced. It embodies psychological and physical horror to its peaks. And I absolutely recommend checking out this book if you're a fan of The Thing or Lord of the Flies or any sort of other sort of body horror. What's the message I take away at the end of all this? Well, I guess to certainly not judge a book by its cover. I think the boys had this, sort of concrete black and white picture of themselves and each other when it came to their group dynamics. And as, I guess, the reality of the situation that was going on, their true selves started to blossom. And I think they were all kind of surprised at how their roles changed within the group. I also take away that, we should really be more accepting of how perceptive children are. I think it's easy to sort of brush them aside as to not knowing or not being able to understand things that we deem too complicated for them. That's a big theme throughout the book, is that children sort of have this elasticity with their imagination that anything can happen and very quite possibly will. Whereas with adults, our mindset is so concrete that when something breaks that concrete, we lose our minds and go insane. So, I think we just have to give kids a little more credit as far as being able to understand certain adult situations. I think not only does it help show a sort of respect to them between us as adults and them as kids, but I think also helps their understanding of the world around them in certain situations. But that's going to be it for me today, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, I really appreciate your time. If you haven't made it this far, I still appreciate you giving me a little bit of your day and just checking out what I have to say for a bit. But until next time, everyone, I gotta get something to eat. I'm starving. Be kind to yourselves, and I'll see you later.